Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking my GTX 770 Lightning for a bit of a spin. Okay, this is working. So this is the GTX 770 Lightning that I repaired, and then did a bunch of like oscilloscope testing on the GPU reactor, and then I did more testing because as you can see that reactor does not look at all like it should look. Um, anyway, yeah, so we will be looking at some like spreadsheet stuff for the new reactor because that actually works right there. But first we're going to be running some Firestrike and doing some overclocking. So, and I do have what's also, I guess, what's going on with the measuring stuff. So we've got the current clamp on the 8-pin power connectors of the GPU, so we get a rough indication of how much power the GPU is pulling. I'm not sure how much power the card pulls in from the PCIe slot. Also, the card has no power limit. I've disabled that in hardware because, like, technically, yes, you can do it with a BIOS mod, but here, like, the thing is I have like folders of AMD GPU BIOSes and they're a mess. And so basically I've decided unless I can change like memory timings or something, I am not getting into Nvidia BIOSes because voltages and power limits I can do in hardware, and then when I pull a card out of a box, I don't need to wonder, does this have some messed up BIOS on it, or like, so I much prefer just physically disabling things like power limits and that kind of thing. So anyway, card has no power limit, and yeah, and then we've got the multimeter because I do actually have voltage control in software, which is pretty cool. So I'll just use the multimeter to show you that that works. Anyway, so for the actual rest of the sort of like what's going to be carrying the card through 3Dmark Firestrike, I've got the 10900K at 5.3 gigahertz. This is actually Geekbench 3 stable, like it'll finish Geekbench 3. It needs way too much voltage for 5.3 gigahertz. I don't think I can run Cinebench with it. Yeah, definitely can't run. Well, Cinebench will either overheat or not finish. I'm not sure which one it's going to be. For the memory, this is actually, so I have two of the Team Group T-Force Extreme ARGB kits. This is the second one. I don't think it's like, and we're running 4400, 17, 18, 18, 35. This isn't like stability tested. It's also at 1.55 volts just because, like, originally I wanted to run 1716, but either the memory controller on the CPU or the memory kit isn't capable of doing that. I want to blame the memory controller. Because in my past testing between like this kit and that other kit I have are very, very similar at less aggressive, like lower frequencies. They behave very, very similarly. So I really think it's just the memory controller complaining about my TRCD being too low. If I set it to 1716 instead of 1718. So yeah, and then the motherboard is just the Maximus 12 Apex, which it just kind of like I was doing some testing on that board, so that board's just kind of sitting here, and I threw the GTX 770 in it. Anyway, so let's open up 3Dmark and Nvidia Inspector and GPU Z and also Hall of Fame NVDD all. So I actually don't know where I got this, but luckily for me, I have a flash stick just loaded with all the different, like, actually, like, I just store all kinds of random overclocking software that I think is going to be useful or is useful to me immediately. Like this utility right here. So this is made by Galax. It's meant for the Hall of Fame cards, which is why it's Hoff NVDD. But the cool thing is, even on this Lightning, this actually has voltage control. Now I have been running into at higher voltages. I think I've been running into either OVP or OCP. I'm not sure which, and that's not the utility's fault. That's just down to what the programming of the voltage controller. So I technically do still have a power limit, but it's not like your usual Nvidia power limit. Oh no, not Afterburner. No, I don't want Afterburner. Somebody might be like, why don't you use Afterburner? And the reasoning is there's like a certain set of GPUs where it's incredibly buggy, and because of that I just have a habit of not using it, because then I don't have to wonder which, like, then I won't screw something up by accident, because if I just don't use the thing that screws something up, then it's like, yeah. Anyway, and so Nvidia Inspector has all the controls I have that I need anyway. And the mouse is being really glitchy today right now. Anyway, so we're going to set the fan speed to 93%. The card is on the stock air cooler. And yeah, so it's on the stock air cooler. It's worth noting that the 3Dmark like start menu is actually relatively GPU heavy, which is kind of obnoxious. The card like if you run like if you're trying to start 3Dmark at the lowest possible starting temperature, you can't do it. Like you have to close the UI. Oh, and then like wait for the card to cool down, open it, and then you can run your then you can run your benchmarks, which is just really, really annoying in my opinion. Anyway, so we're gonna bump this up. Actually, I'm not gonna set anything for now. I'm just gonna show you the current core voltage. So luckily, this being a lightning, we have a bunch of voltage read points. Now, I don't have the little adapters for them, but we don't really need that. Also, I'm pulling my ground off of the PCIe bracket of the GPU, so this measurement isn't super accurate, but I don't care about it being super accurate. I just want to know that the voltage is actually changing. So right now we're at 1.1 volts because we're in some weird mid-state between 3D load and like idle. For memory voltage, we're at 1.6, I think. Yeah, 1.6, which is just the default memory voltage on this card. And then we have the PLL rail, which is at 1.05, I want to say, because that's just where it is. It's a 1.05 volt rail. Anyway, so now we're gonna adjust our voltages. So I'm gonna bump this up to 1.381. Because that's just been the voltage that I've been testing with so far, and plus 60 millivolts on the memory voltage. So the really neat thing is, A, I have voltage control for the core, and B, so now you can see that we're at like 1.39, and it's a little bit high because, again, I'm not grounding properly, and I don't know where that read point actually goes to. And then for the memory, we should be at 1.63-ish. Yeah, so the weird thing is that offset thing, like for the memory, for some reason doesn't really offset as much as I think it should. We're gonna bump it up, like I just bumped it up to plus 100, and it's gonna be probably at like 1.65, yeah. So the offset seems to be like half as much as the software says it is, but like that's fine. I don't actually care. We don't need that much adjustment. So I'm just going to put it back down to plus 60. It's really interesting. The card is on Hynix memory chips, and I can actually go over 2 gigahertz memory clock, but it's very, like, they're very, I think that they don't like they scale a little bit with voltage, but they definitely don't like too much voltage. And they also don't like they don't run like 1999. I think is just like a strap, like a timing strap issue, where if you're just under 2 gigahertz, it's actually really unstable, and then if you go over 2 gigahertz, it's still pretty unstable, but it'll finish Firestrike. So you know, there's no requirement to for if you're doing just like benchmarking for hardware bot, there's no requirement to finish benchmarks without any artifacts. You just have to get a valid score, which yeah, for Firestrike specifically, the rules are pretty loose. So we should be able to run, I'm not sure about plus 180, but plus 170 should work, and plus 520. Now, I've not run these exact settings that I've just applied. So I've not run exactly this combination through the whole of Firestrike. So here's hoping that this actually works. And yeah, so this should run like 14. Actually, before we damn it, why is the mouse so glitchy? I really need to do, like, this OS has just been an absolute nightmare. So yeah, 1424 with 2 gigahertz mem. Really just 2? Should be able to do, yeah, okay, we're gonna run 2 gigahertz, 25 megahertz on the memory. Because the thing is that like that should like I've managed to do, it's kind of, so worth noting about Firestrike, graphics test 1 is very core heavy, not very memory heavy. Graphics test 2 is the exact opposite, where it's very memory heavy, not very core heavy. It pulls less power, it runs cooler. But if your memory overclock is unstable, it's going to crash GT2, not necessarily GT. Like, unless you push really crazy memory clocks, right? But I can finish GT1 at like higher memory clocks than I can finish GT2. So, anyway, we're going to put this up here so that you can actually see the current draw as the card runs. It's a GTX 770. It really doesn't pull that much power. But anyway, so we're just going to run this. And actually, we don't need voltage readings at this point. Because again, they're like not super accurate. It's mostly just to show that the voltage goes up and down with the Hall of Fame voltage utility. Yeah, so it's like a 300 watt-ish overclock for GT1. That's ignoring any power it's pulling from the PCIe slot, which, like, the card, like, it's still going to be under 400 watts for the entire card. I'd be very... Oh, it crashed? That's surprising. Should have probably run just plus 60. So that was GT1, though, so... Apply clocks. And now the temperature's not going to go down. So right now, right, it's sitting at 44 degrees. And it's not going to cool down very quickly because Firestrike, is like 3Dmark's open. So we're going to close 3Dmark. Now it should cool down, right? Because now our clocks drop down to 135 and like proper idle. So I'm going to just let it cool down and then I'm going to open 3Dmark again. And then we're going to go straight into Firestrike. So... Yeah, that's just like tricks for benching on air cooling. Also, I have the window open and it's like 5 a.m. in the morning, so it's about as cold as it's going to get. Actually, at this point, the sun's come up, so it's not as cold as it could be. It would have been colder like maybe half an hour ago or something, or an hour ago, but it's not too much of a difference, right? Like the sun is just rising, so... It's not really going to affect the ambient temperature too much just yet, but yeah, like this thing is super on the edge of stability. So now we're at 34 degrees. It's not really going to get any cooler at this point, so I'm just going to go for it. Also, I've had to reinstall 3Dmark so many times. Mostly because of like memory stability issues. Like if you crash if you get a blue screen while the 3Dmark UI is open, there's a pretty good chance it's gonna forget that you have any like benchmarks installed, and then you have to reinstall the whole thing. Oh, come on. Well, looks like we're gonna be reinstalling 3Dmark, boys. Yeah, so this is what I've been fighting with for like a while with this setup here. Oh, and the GPU has a tendency of just like not coming back for some reason if it crashes. I think it has something to do with the Hall of Fame utility. Oh no, not 3Dmark. I don't want to open 3Dmark first. Oops. Yeah, because... No, we're going to close that. We're going to get... Wait, what did I just open? What's that shortcut for? Oh, that's set clocks and voltage. No, I need fan control. Yeah, okay, it's set the clocks right now. But I need fan control, so we're going to bump it to 90... And the reason why I don't max the fan is that there's some weird like reverberating noise at full fan speed, like maxed fan speed on this card, and I find it really obnoxious. So I go almost up to 100%. Okay, 1.381, 1.387 should be fine. Gonna bump up the core voltage ever so slightly more. If I had more cooling, like say water cooling instead of just air, I'd be willing to go up to like over 1.4, but anyway, so at this point I'll just close that. Why do I even open GPU-Z? Like, we don't need it. We just need like... Well, I wanted to show... Actually, I do remember why we need it. And... Oh, the benchmarks are still there. That's good. So sometimes when Firestrike, like if you crash with the 3Dmark open, you'll start it up again, and all of the benchmarks will be grayed out, and you have to reinstall. Or at least I've not found a better solution to it than reinstalling. So yeah, I just want GPU-Z for temperature monitoring, because it does have like overtime graphs instead of just like current temperature that we have in Nvidia Inspector. So is it on plus 160? No, it's on plus 170. we should be, and let's run Firestrike again. Hopefully this time it doesn't up and die. Fun fact, this collecting system info thing, like, puts crazy amounts of load on the CPU. So you can actually run, like, physics, the physics benchmark in 3Dmark at higher clocks than you can start 3Dmark, which is really dumb. Like, yeah. Also, if you're wondering about why there's a negative sign in front of the current reading, which you can't really see because it's being obscured by the 24 pin, but there is a negative sign there, and if you've noticed it, then the reason why there's that minus sign is because of the direction that the current clamp is clamped around the 8-pin power connectors. So that's why it's reading negative. If I turned the current clamp around, you couldn't see it anymore, and it wouldn't have the minus sign. So, you know, it's kind of didn't have a better option. Okay, a moment of truth if my memory overclock is stable. Like, I've actually gone ahead and added a bunch of capacitors to the memory power. Unfortunately, I ran out of, I've basically burned through all my modding supplies at this point. I'm running out of solder, capacitors. What else is there? Actually, that's most of it. I'm just mostly running out of caps and solder. So, yeah, but I added some extra caps to the memory. Because the memory scales a little bit with voltage, which means that it is voltage sensitive. But at the same time, if you raise the voltage too high, it gets unstable. And also, this is incredibly stable right now. I'm used to this having, like, black flickers all over it when it's running, and right now it's... Oh, there it is. Yeah, so those flickers, I'm used to those being far more frequent than they are being right now. But... yeah, since I figured, like, okay, well, the memory scales with voltage, therefore it should also scale with capacitors, because the whole idea behind adding capacitors is that your voltage, like, your minimum load voltage goes up a bit. So your voltage stability improves. And so I added a bunch of, like, I added some 470 microfarad caps that I salvaged off of, I think, a dead Vega. Yeah, actually, I think all of my 470s are off of dead Vegas. So, yeah, there's like two 470 microfarad caps all the way at the furthest memory chips. Because the thing is, I also did a test if there's like a power distribution problem for the memory. Because on some cards, if you measure the memory voltage like right at the output of the memory VRM, it's like 1.6 volts, and then if you measure on the other end of the memory power plane by the furthest away memory chip, you'll have like 1.55 volts, which is like, okay, well, that's a problem. But this card doesn't do that. There's like 10, 15 millivolts difference between the highest voltage memory chip and the lowest voltage memory chip, so that's like, there's no point trying to fix that. That's fine. But I figured, hey, maybe throwing some extra capacitors at the memory chips on the other end of the card should help with the overclocking a bit. And this is one of the more disappointing scores for this setup. I think it might be just like a little, I might have pushed the memory a little bit too far. But yeah, there we go. Like, that's actually not bad for an air-cooled, like for a stock-cooled GTX 770. This is just fine. So by which I mean, like, here, if we go on the 3Dmark Firestrike, I mean on hardware bot, because I'm benching hardware bot rules, not 3Dmark rules, and also because, yeah, like, I'm just doing hardware bot rules. But which actually I could be running LOD and then I'd be getting more points, but I prefer hardware bot. I don't really like 3Dmark's lookup functionality is obnoxious as hell. So anyway, so for air-cooled GTX 770s, I have the highest score. For stock-cooled GTX 770s, I also have the highest score. For water cooling, I'm really behind because, like, on water cooling, the cards are running like 1528, like 1500 plus core clock, and I'm running 1411. So yeah. So I'm down on just like GPU core power. But you know, that's like, I'm on an air cooler. So what do you expect? And the thing is, I assume there's a lot of people running the cards on like the stock cooler that have it just under any, which if I go with that, yeah, like this right here, but that's lower than me. Like the scores without, actually these guys should be on LN2, I think. Like that, yeah, that's 1502. He's not on, there's no way that's on air cooling. I want to see system pictures. Firefox really doesn't like hardware bot. Yeah, okay, he's on water cooling. And I'm assuming the other guy's also on water cooling. Like this one right here. But anyway, so yeah, like this for the cooling configuration, this is actually a really nice score. Which yeah, I mean, it's a Lightning. It would be kind of disappointing if it wasn't. I guess I could post this score. How much is that worth? Like, stop. It's over 15 points. Yeah, I should maybe submit that. Like, the thing is, I'm also planning to probably run the card on some better cooling eventually. Not water cooling, because I just feel like that's a waste. Like, there's not really a point in water cooling the card, in my opinion. I'm thinking, like, maybe if I ordered a box of dry ice, this will be one of the cards that I'll try to get through. Anyway, let's take a look at the new and improved GPU core reactor. So I'm just going to shut this down. Let's pull that reactor off. I think the highest score that I've managed off of camera was like 9,126 or like just under 9,200, I want to say, overall. Obviously, the CPU is carrying the card quite hard, right? Because there's a physics score component and that kind of thing. But anyway, here's the new GPU core reactor, and I'm not on autofocus. Give me a second. Oh. Where am I supposed to hold this? There we go. Come on, camera. I believe in you. Hell yeah. So, as you can clearly see, I've replaced all the SMD aluminum polymers that were on this with a bunch of through-hole aluminum polymers, and then I just kind of bent the legs out to get them on there. So the soldering quality is absolutely atrocious, but, you know, it works. That's all I really care about. Now, the funny thing is that these caps that I replaced it with, these are 1200 microfarad RS8 series Nichicon FP caps, so aluminum polymers again. And let's just go back to the Scribble Vids. There we go. Scribble Vids is the name of the scene that I use for one of my monitors. But anyway, in OBS. Anyway, so I call this the fat reactor because these are 1200 microfarad caps. Also, just physically, it just takes up more space now than it did before. And the interesting thing is, like, if you look at the fat reactor versus the stock reactor, so this is the stock reactor, because I actually have a GTX 680 Lightning, and that uses the same PCB as well as the same reactor. There's the effect they have is actually very, very similar. Now, the fat reactor is actually ever so slightly weaker, which like I expected, because the through-hole aluminum polymers are just not as good as the SMD aluminum polymers. But yeah, very slight disadvantage in absolute minimum voltage, and then slight advantage in, well, actually, like, yeah, there's just like basically they perform the same, except on the stock reactor, you have 8 470 microfarad capacitors, whereas I'm on 8 1200 microfarad capacitors. So mine is like 9600 microfarads, which is just like, yeah, that gives you some idea of like why the SMD polymers are just so much better. Because it's like I'm running like almost 3 times, actually, yeah, almost 3 times as much capacitance, and I'm getting roughly the same effect on the actual voltage regulation because these caps are just not, like, ESR and ESL wise, these are significantly worse than the SMD capacitors. So yeah, like, they're not as efficient, but yeah, so that's kind of interesting, that, like, ultimately, you know, if you just throw enough capacitance at the problem, you do eventually get to the same performance level, but it's just like, it's not a great way of doing things. Then the thing is, I've actually gone ahead and added a bunch of capacitors under the reactor because I noticed that, well, there's space under there. So let's get the camera, and there we go. Oh, thing is, I'm holding the mic in one hand and I have to control the camera with the other. So this is a bit of a, yeah. So, well, you can't really see much of anything. Actually, no, you can kind of make it out. So yeah, that's where the rest of my multi-layer ceramics went, behind the core. So yeah, I just have a bunch of multi-layer ceramics that I use for modding because they're really convenient. Like if you're just going for memory caps and that kind of thing, you can just add like one cap per memory chip or two caps per memory chip, and yeah. So I do have a bunch of those, and I also just like whacking them behind cores. And the idea behind this was, well, there's a bunch of space under the reactor because it sits pretty far off from the back of the core. And so I thought, well, since I have space, why wouldn't I just whack more capacitors in said space? And that's what I ended up with. And there's basically a mix of there's some 47 microfarad 0805s, there's some 22 microfarad 0603s, and there's also a bunch of 0402 4.7 microfarad capacitors. So yeah, I just kind of went to town. Like basically, that's where the rest of my capacitors went. Well, actually no, I did this before I did the memory, but yeah, that's a big part of why I've run out of capacitors recently. And then of course here you can sort of, oops, hit the camera. Sorry about that. But here you can see like the polymers that were originally on the reactor. So you can see some of those over there. But yeah, that's not all of them. That's just like 3 out of the 8 in total. But the rest of them are hiding under the card. And there's another video where I show the GPU core, like I'll link the other video with the card that'll show you the actual bare PCB, though it won't show you what I did to the memory, but I don't consider that finished because I did, like, again, I ran out of capacitors. Ideally, I wanted to add like 247 microfarad caps per memory chip, but I only had literally like I only had like 247 microfarad caps left, so there's only one memory chip that got those. So yeah, I'm kind of annoyed about that, but anyway, um, yeah, back to the spreadsheet. We have so at this point, like this is the sort of what I consider BZE, so Buildzoid edition configuration of the card, and well, that didn't really do much of anything, did it? Like this is the stock card. Oh no, that's with the reactor. So there's no reactor. What's the reactor mod? I think the reactor mod is me moving the reactor to the card. Oh boy. Why didn't I have a notes column? Like no reactor is pretty simple. So no reactor bad. Reactor mod I'm assuming is me soldering the reactor. Yeah, that is what it is. So um yeah. So basically the extra multi-layer ceramics didn't do much of anything. They seem to have improved the peak to peak average a little bit, but yeah, they didn't really do to the anything to the minimums. Like they reduced the overshoot, which is just like I don't really care about the overshoot. But then with the yeah, and the reactor SLI still behaves the same. Well, no, like I shaved off a little bit of peak voltage again, but again, it's like the overshoot just doesn't really. No, there's a slight improvement in the minimums right there. So yeah, the thing is, I did this test, like I did all these measurements like ages and ages ago, so I don't actually remember the date or result. Like I'm looking at this data with you at this point and trying to read into it. Probably not the best way of doing a video, but too late. I'm not reshooting this. Yeah, I'm not reshooting this. I've been stuck on like getting this video done for super long, and I partially because I kept having to reinstall 3Dmark after it would crash, because I had a really unstable memory overclock, and I kept like eventually the way I fixed that was I just went like I am not opening 3Dmark until I have an overclock that finishes Geekbench, because if I can finish Geekbench, then my memory, like, there's no way it won't finish 3Dmark. That was my logic, at least. Um, and that logic is pretty sound. It's like Geekbench is a good indicator that your memory overclock is rather stable, and that your CPU's memory controller is relatively stable, and that your CPU overclock is relatively stable. So it's just like Geekbench 3 is a good way to check that you're going to finish 3Dmark, and you're not going to have to reinstall it 10 times. Anyway, yeah, so basically the Buildzoid edition with Reactor SLI, so that's not the FAC reactor, that was the like proper lightning reactor. It actually has a slight improvement in minimum average voltage. So yeah, like the all the extra caps that I piled onto the back of the core, they helped. Then the fat reactor has about as much effect as the regular reactor. So yeah, what we ran here is basically this plus the fat reactor. Um, and so that should perform about like this part right here, which, yeah, most of that is just overshoot. And then again, I'm annoyed that my oscilloscope doesn't do measurements into the millivolt range. Well, it doesn't track statistics into the millivolt range. It tracks down to, 10 millivolts, which is just because the thing is, there's a pretty decent chance that I've improved the minimums by like 1 or 2 minimums, like millivolts, like this right here. Because the thing is, like 1.13 volts can mean 1.125, and it can also mean 1.134. So it's like I might have bumped it from 1.125 to like 1.13, or maybe it went from 1.13 to 1.134. Which it's 4 millivolts, so not very significant, but it's just like I'd be interested to be able to see that. But anyway, so yeah, that's the GTX 770 Lightning I have at this point. It goes very fast. Well, it goes pretty fast. It's not the fastest GTX 770 out there. The fastest GTX 770 out there currently uh, is on dry, like, yeah, was run on dry ice, which is why I'm kind of considering, like, hey, I could do that. I could get some dry ice, try beat this score right here. Which that's over 1600 core. I think that should be possible. I don't think that would be too hard. The main issue, like the main concern I have right now, is I'm still not sure if I don't have a OCP or OVP issue, because sometimes the card just doesn't want to, like I've not tested that it works consistently at higher voltages. So that's something I need to check, though. At the same time, if you're on dry ice, your average current draw goes down a bit. Like your current draw relative to the voltage goes down compared to like ambient testing. So that might not be an issue. Anyway, yeah, so there, that's it. That's it for the video. Hopefully you found this somewhat interesting. Also, why is it out of focus again? It's on auto. Come on, camera. Oh, man, it is having a really hard time. I wonder why. I'll put it back on manual. Ta-da! Okay, so yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below, which is, well, that's mostly going to go to funding a bunch of extra capacitors at this point. Because again, I've burnt through my modding supplies recently. Which is a good thing, because I have like tons and tons of cards for like I want to do various like modding experiments, and it's just like not getting around to doing them is annoying. Anyway, so yeah, there's the Patreon link in the description, and there's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, the usual YouTuber merch. There's a link to that down in the description below as well. Yeah, that helps out immensely with running the channel as well. So if you'd like to support me through that, there's that option as well. So yeah, that is it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.